Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles, a certified consulting hypnotist and life coach. And every Saturday afternoon at 2:30, I make a short 5 or 10 minute video about some aspect of coaching or the hypnotic arts and sciences. Today I want to talk about how I got started in hypnotism and came to be where I am in the profession today. Um, I often will share this information when I do workshops and other sorts of trainings, but for those people who don't attend those, I thought you might enjoy the chance to hear my story because it is a strange one. When I was 10 years old, I saw Dr. Ormond McGill perform his concert of hypnotism on what he would later tell me must have been the Art Linkletter show. And I was so enchanted by what I saw Ormond do that I sent away for my first book on hypnosis with quarters I saved up from my allowance that was advertised in the back of Superman comic books. And people from my generation may remember that ad. You had a man in a tuxedo standing above a Cyprian woman wearing a gown that she had obviously applied with a brush and a roller, and he was waving his hands and there were lightning bolts coming out of his fingers about how to hypnotize. I would later discover that that graphic was actually created by Ormond McGill. I didn't know that until just recently. Now, the theory in the book was really pretty silly, mind control, but the techniques are the same techniques that we teach students in our state licensed hypnosis schools today. I often say that hypnotists are born, not made. You have to have a certain kind of personality to be a hypnotist, or at least to be an outstanding one. And if you have that personality, it doesn't take much information to get you in a lot of trouble, and that's what happened to me. I really did learn enough from that book that I was able to hypnotize my grade school classmates to sing the Star-Spangled Banner whenever the teacher turned her back to the classroom to erase the blackboard. Now, all the students thought that it was a great goof, but they then discovered they didn't want to stop and things got a little scary. I was thrown out of school. My parents forbade me to have anything further to do with hypnotism, and we see how well that worked. Hypnotism became my life's passion. I would read everything I could get my hands on, even sneaking into the adult library in Stratford, Connecticut, to go downstairs in the stacks where the 100 level and the Dewey Decimal System books were stored, because that's the category where you'll find books on hypnotism. And I think the librarians were fully aware of what I was doing, but they had this kid who was reading, so that they were willing to look the other way. When later I would enter the culinary union and move up the ranks as a cook and a chef, I would actually hypnotize my coworkers to help them focus on the service tickets, to help them stand up to the stress of working in volcanic heat in a high competitive environment. They often appreciated it. And I really got to see hypnotism as a way to help other people in a life-enhancing fashion. After I graduated with my doctoral degree, I had the opportunity to train with Associated Mental Health Services, a practice affiliated with Rush Medical Center here in the Chicago area. And I did the training program they offered in hypnotism, both basic, intermediate, and advanced, and would later do a 2-year mentorship with one of the leading figures who would later become one of the presidents of the Division of Psychological Hypnosis of the American Psychological Association. Now, that practice was affiliated with the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnotism, one of the two big scientific organizations for the study of hypnosis, the other being the American Society of Clinical Hypnotism. At the time, doctoral level clergy were permitted to participate, but their rules changed. They became sort of anti-clerical, and members of the clergy, regardless if you held an earned doctoral degree or not, were not welcomed in the organization, so I had to find somewhere else to go. At the time, I was serving as the parish minister to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Oak Park, Illinois, a national landmark building created by Frank Lloyd Wright, and truly a beautiful structure and a transformational one. I had 9 women in the congregation, and I would serve that church for 10 years, who had breast cancer. They were all being treated out of rush, and they came to me and asked if I would help them with the side effects of their treatment. Now, today, we have very sophisticated treatments for breast cancer, but back then, the treatments were pretty punishing. There was no literature about how to do this kind of hypnosis, so I literally made it up as I went along. But all 9 of those women did much better than anyone expected them to do. And they told their oncologist that the hypnosis was a factor. And at that point, the oncologist wanted to send other patients. And within a few years, that completely took over my career. As soon as my denomination created a tract in 1991 that would allow a clergy person to do a ministry to the community as opposed to a local parish, I immediately jumped at the chance and never looked back since. Basically, as I was moving up in my skill as a hypnotist, I needed to find an organization to relate to. I needed continuing education, I needed supervision to hone my skills. So I joined an organization that did accept members of the clergy, the National Association of Clergy Hypnotherapists. I would rise to be one of its officers. Now, NACH was a small organization, meant to help people who were in congregational settings doing hypnosis with some of the predictable problems you might find in that environment. Problems with the board misunderstanding, members of the congregation not being afraid of hypnotism, and so on. It was a great organization, but too small to ultimately survive. So as one of the officers, I brokered a merger between the largest and oldest hypnosis organization in the world, the National Guild of Hypnotists, based in New Hampshire, and the National Association of Clergy Hypnotherapists, and the organizations merged. And at that point, I became a member of the National Guild of Hypnotists. Now, the very same year I did this, when I went to my very first guild convention, the state of Illinois passed a law that said only licensed psychologists could do hypnosis or hypnotism. Now, most psychologists do not have training in the hypnotic arts and sciences. They might have at best one course. But the law said they could do hypnotism even if they never took that course or took it and failed. And this would close down the work of all hypnotists in the state of Illinois. So I mentioned this to the guild, and they asked if I cared enough to do something about it. I said yes. I would then head up a team of hypnotic colleagues over a 6-year period where we passed a law in Illinois that would allow people to practice hypnosis who were not necessarily licensed as psychologists. That law has been in effect since that time, since 1997. It's been very successful. There have been no problems. The psychology associations played fair, and we've had no difficulties. And that law has become sort of a model for legislation around the country. After I informed the Guild that we were successful, the president of the National Guild of Hypnotists, Dr. Dwight Damon, called me and said, well, Scott, now know more than anyone else how to pass this kind of law. So I would like you to do it for the whole nation. And not knowing any better, I said yes. And I proceeded to become the legislation and governmental concerns person for the National Guild of Hypnotists, a volunteer activity that would then take up a heck of a lot of my time over the ensuing years. But we were completely successful. We have made it possible for people to practice hypnotism in every state without necessarily having to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And the profession has grown geometrically. There are now hundreds, if not thousands, of full-time practicing hypnotists earning a good living at the craft. Now, another thing that happened to me as I moved my own practice forward is I reflected on something that had gone wrong for me. My very first career, as I said, was as a cook and as a chef. And I began to rise up the ranks of the line in the professional kitchen, in the brigade system of Escoffier. And I got to a point where, the money was pretty good and I was in a supervisory role, but I was no longer cooking. I was supervising people who cooked. I was doing administration. I didn't like doing administration. I liked doing cooking. When I felt my call to ministry and retrained as a minister, I would have a 13-year career as a parish minister, 10 of those at the church in Oak Park. And at that point, a larger church, I wasn't doing ministry anymore. I was supervising people who were doing ministry. I was spending my entire day on administration. I didn't like that. I wanted to do ministry, not paperwork. So when I opened my own practice 30 plus years ago, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let it happen to me again. I was going to keep my practice limited so that I would do the work that I enjoyed doing and not end up, supervising other practitioners and spending my day with administration and withholding accounts and policy books and that sort of thing. It was a good choice for me. I've had to act 6, 7 times to limit the practice in various ways so that I get to have the fun doing the work I want to do instead of letting someone else do it. And that has been effective for me. So that's why I chose to base my practice in a home office. I chose to stay primarily focused on client services, not doing a lot of instruction or running training courses as a lot of professional hypnotists do. And I also made it an absolute point that I wouldn't need to hire all kinds of staff. I use a model called the ideal micro practice for running my office, a model first developed for primary care physicians, but it works for people like me too. It's a small solo or almost solo practice. You use technology instead of staff. You do a lot online. There's actually a whole group called Exploring the intentional micro practice technique, and it's been very helpful to me. So I run an ideal hypnotic micro practice, and it meets my needs, and that's an important thing, because it is true. If you do work you love, you never work another day in your life. Hey, thank you very much for being here. I will be back next Saturday at the same time, 2:30 Central, talking about a different topic. And I think what I'm going to talk about there is dreaming, because people trained by Bernie Siegel, like myself, Dr. Bernie Siegel, the author of the book Love, Medicine, and Miracles, and others, use dream interpretation a great deal. So I'll be talking about how we do that. Tune in if you have an interest. As always, if I can be helpful to you as a life coach or as a hypnotic practitioner, please feel free to reach out to me. I do free clinics in an arc around Chicago. I do a hospital-based research program, and I work one-on-one with clients here at my home office, and I can almost always help. Often, I can help when no one else can. Thank you much. Have a great day.